The St. Louis Cardinals just did not look sharp on Wednesday in the series finale against the Detroit Tigers. It's the Cardinals' first series loss in nearly a month. Are we panicking? What's the reaction? We'll talk about it all coming up on your everyday St. Louis Cardinals podcast, b-schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of b-schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you on Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. Tonight we're breaking down the Cardinals' loss from Wednesday afternoon at Busch Stadium. 5-1, they fall to the Detroit Tigers. They lose that series finale after the middle game of the series was the tough loss to Tarik Skubal, where Tarik Skubal didn't actually get the win. The Cardinals came back on him. They came back on the Detroit bullpen and fell a little bit short. I feel like the way that Tuesday's game ended, the way that it ultimately played out for the Cardinals, may have had an impact on Wednesday's outcome too. Rarely do you want to see that. Well, you never want to see it in professional sports where one day carries over to the next. And baseball is probably the most difficult sport to see it happen because of the fact that you do play every single day, 162 games throughout a 6-month season, so you can ill afford to have that happen. But it's also, by design, then, probably one of the most difficult sports to avoid it from time to time. And if that's, in fact, what happened to the Cardinals on Wednesday, it's just one of those games. It was a bullpen game for the Detroit Tigers, and you feel like that should give the Cardinals an inherent advantage. They weren't able to come up with it offensively. They just didn't look as crisp in the at-bats. And certainly on the mound, Pallante was not as crisp for the Cardinals on Wednesday afternoon. The walks came back to haunt him, so we'll evaluate his performance, talk a little bit about who stood out offensively and the way that this one went down, and maybe some of the conversations that I still feel like Cardinals fans, and maybe this is just baseball fans in general, sometimes have a little bit of trouble with when it comes to seeing a reliever in a game that still feels like it's within reach, and folks getting upset that that guy's in the game because they should be going with a more prominent arm from the bullpen. I want to kind of talk generally about that concept and why major league managers, and in this particular case, Oliver Marmol, has to go about things the way that he does throughout a 162-game season and a 6-month summer. So I want to get into all of that on b-schaeff Daily. We'll also go down on the farm. I do need to update you guys on some things that you probably have seen by now when it comes to the Cardinals minor league system, and some notable news as it pertains to two key prospects, Quinn Mathews and Tink, hence potentially on the path to returning, which could potentially mean down the road sometime this summer, maybe either of those guys or perhaps both of them making an MLB debut in 2025. And I would have told you last week, very unlikely that we would see that as a possibility. And now I maybe would be changing my tune because we're maybe seeing those guys get back to health a little bit sooner than I would have anticipated, and I can explain a little bit of why that might be. But to make sure you don't miss any of the action or the content on b-schaeff Daily, it's your St. Louis Cardinals everyday podcast, breaking down everything going on with the team. Do me a quick favor, hit that subscribe button on this channel. If you're watching on YouTube, hit like on the video as well, and leave your comment with your thoughts on what's going on with the Cardinals. And, of course, you can also find b-schaeff Daily on podcast platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Let's get into the meat and potatoes, though, of tonight's game as the Cardinals, or I should say this afternoon's game, as the Cardinals fall 5-1 in a game where they just really weren't super competitive, but they weren't totally out of it. It felt a little sleepy Wednesday afternoon at Busch Stadium. And, again, I can't necessarily even fault the Cardinals for every once in a while when you have a loss like you did on Tuesday, and then you've got a 12:15 start the next day, local time. It can be really difficult to get up off the mat. And I'm not saying that this was evident in a lack of effort or a lack of preparation. I'm not saying any of those things. That would be inflammatory, and that's why I'm not saying it. But when you watch the game, we've all watched baseball games. We've seen this sport play out over the course of time over and over and over again. And some games just feel like a little sleepier than others. And I feel like that's what played out for the Cardinals in this one, as they only muster 5 hits in a bullpen game. 5 hits and 1 run in a 5-1 loss. It's not to take away from the pitchers on the other side, and sometimes those bullpen games can be the trickiest because as a hitter, you pretty much know you're only going to face a guy one time, and then next time you bat, it's going to be somebody new. And that was the case for most of the Cardinals lineup throughout most of the opportunities that everybody had in this game. Herter was the first man out for the Tigers in this one, and it was funny listening to the radio this afternoon as I was in the car for the very beginning of the game. I believe he threw a couple of pitches outside the zone to Mason Wynn, who was the leadoff batter for the Cardinals on Wednesday. And the radio broadcasters were kind of going, yeah, we probably should give you his profile and let you know a little bit more about Herter, because I don't think we're going to be seeing him in the game for very long. And at that moment I said, Ricky, John, no, don't do that, because you know for sure that as much as I do not believe in the jinx, and so I'm, of course, saying all of this in jest, you do know that when you say something like that, now it's obviously going to be this guy coming out to shove. And he ended up kind of shoving. 3 innings of scoreless baseball, gave up 1 hit, 1 walk, struck out a couple, but I think certainly got a little bit deeper into the game than you might have anticipated in a bullpen start. Brant Herter, the left-hander, was hurting the Cardinals. See what I did there? The first time through the order. But then everybody else coming out of the bullpen. A couple of innings for Lee, Gunther, 2/3 of an inning, Hannafy, 2/3 of an inning, Holton, 2/3 of an inning, and then they had Brisky. I'm definitely saying Bo Brisky's name wrong, but that's what it looks like to me. Couple of innings to finish things off after the Cardinals, kind of went out with a little bit of a whimper there after the Tigers got those 2 runs in the 8th inning. That really felt like maybe it sealed the deal. From there, prior to that point, the Cardinals had been, like I said, it's not that they were uncompetitive, but it didn't feel like a game that they were about to rise up and grab. Tuesday's game really felt throughout like the Cardinals weren't it, like they were going to find a way to rally back. Once Arenado hit that home run on Tuesday, you're like, all right, this is a game that the Cardinals are in for the long haul. We're going to get 9 good innings out of them. And I just didn't necessarily get that sense, even when this game was 3-1. Or perhaps 3-0. Like you bounce back with the run in the bottom of the 6th to answer the run that Detroit had there in the top half, as Pallante was out of the game before the end of that 6th inning, but was charged with the 3 runs in this game. He walked 4, gave up 4 hits. He wasn't awful, but he wasn't as sharp as we've seen him at times, and still ended up being 1 out away from performing with a quality start. But the walks ended up killing him in this game. And for a guy who is pitch to contact, and a lot of times we see that from Pallante, only 3 strikeouts in the game, you do want to limit the number of occasions in which you're giving the free passes away. And 4 walks, I think, is too high of a total for Pallante and for anybody, really. But it ended up being that with the Cardinals offense maybe struggling a little bit to find their rhythm against a bullpen game on the other side. It's unfortunate that you had really 2 starts in a row where Fedde wasn't terrible. 5 2/3, I believe he went as well, gave up the 4 runs. All of those were early. Similar line for Pallante. He doesn't quite get through the 6th, but you feel like you were at least given a chance. And that was true on Tuesday. Cardinals mounted a comeback. They were 4-4 game, and then they ended up losing 5-4. In this one, they didn't quite get the same level of offensive productivity, but it's 3-1. And then we'll talk about this first, because I mentioned it, I teased it off the top. Some of the comments that I saw asking about, like I had somebody in the Discord, which I neglected to mention the Discord as much recently, but I do have a b-schaeff Daily Discord if you're interested in joining that. I'll make sure the link to that is below in the video description for today's video, as well as the link to join the channel membership, which also has a Discord component and a private group chat if you're interested in joining that as well. All the details will be in the video description link below. But there was somebody in the Discord that mentioned, 2 losses in a row and you didn't see Ryan Helsley in these close games. That really feels like a missed opportunity. And I didn't want to pick on that guy necessarily, but I said, look, man, I will lay this out for you. And I knew in that moment I'm going to talk about it on the podcast tonight, because I do think there is still kind of this sense of maybe misunderstanding when it comes to bullpen management. And a lot of times when you're looking at a downside of a 3-1 game and you're the Cardinals fan going, damn it, we're right there. We have a chance to win this game. Let's throw our best at this situation, and maybe they can keep it tied, maybe they can keep it 3-1 where we're only down by a couple and we can find a way to fight back in. Hey, just like we did yesterday, right? That is always the mentality. And let me be real, that's the mentality too. If you're managing, if you're playing, you're always wanting to take advantage of those games where it kind of feels like, again, I am talking about this from the outside. It felt like the Cardinals weren't going to come back and win this game, but I've had that feeling before, and I've been wrong at times before. Wasn't wrong about it today, but that doesn't mean I couldn't have been. It doesn't mean the Cardinals couldn't have mounted that charge, and it's a lot easier to do when it's a 3-1 game compared to when it's a 5-1 game. They didn't win Tuesday, but they had the recipe to have been able to win. right? They were down 4-0, but then they're down 4-2 because they get a couple on a homer. Then you sneak one more across, and it's 4-3. And now it's like, all right, the tenor of the game is changing. You can start to see the gears turning a little bit. But what did Oliver Marmol do? He had a long relief guy, Steven Matz, eat up multiple innings in that game on Tuesday. Even as the Cardinals were kind of getting closer in the game, you kind of have to stick with, look, we're not burning a bunch of relievers to what they call chase a game. When you're down a run or two and you keep putting out your top guys like it's Game 7 of the World Series, or even just any playoff game for that matter, you're going to treat playoff different than you would a regular season game in the month of May. That's called chasing the game, and you can't really, as a manager, afford to do it. It's tempting. At times you're going to want to do it, and I think we can recall several recent examples from Cardinals history of iterations of bullpens, whether it was under Oliver Marmol's management, certainly under Mike Schilt. I remember there was a point in time where he kind of got gruff with the media and said, look, you can't keep going to the same three guys out of your bullpen. You're going to burn them out. You have to have other guys be able to get you outs. At a point in time, I don't remember off the cuff what year that was, but maybe somebody in the comments will. But it's just this notion of you have to be able to have a willingness to rely on some of those guys that are your B relievers, your B squad, right? It's not a game where you're tied. It's not a game where you're up by 1 or 2 runs and you go with the normal, 7th, 8th, 9th inning guys. You kind of have to be a little bit more creative and use some of those other guys that are out there in your bullpen because, and obviously it's not the case today specifically because you have an off day on Thursday, but those add up over the course of the season when you try to chase too many of those games. And then you're really wishing a guy would be available when you have a game that has a higher likelihood to turn into a win, but he's unavailable because he pitched 3 times over the past week. And one of those times was, that's what's so funny about, we just got to get a guy work. Like when Helsley doesn't pitch for a long time in a row, he ends up pitching in a game they're down by 7 because he just has to, get an inning so he can stay sharp. You hate to see that happen. There are times where it's just unavoidable, but also generally speaking, you're going to manage it from the perspective of let's make sure we've got our A squad as fresh as possible for the games that we have a legitimate, stronger likelihood to win. And you have to do it that way. You can't manage for that day every single time because it's a 162-game season. That's why they say it is a marathon, not a sprint. And with that in mind, we see guys like Roycroft come into the game and, not have his best stuff, gives up a hit and a walk, and both those guys end up coming around to score when John King comes into the game. And folks, I saw comments saying, well, how could you bring John King into the game with those runners on second and third? You got to realize inherited runners is a tough thing for even the best of relievers to come in with that situation. Like, it's hard to strain those guys when they're in scoring position and you come into the game. It's a skill to do it. It's a clutch gene to be able to do it. At a certain point, you just have to be able to, throw the next guy in your bullpen. And it's also going to often line up with handedness. It's a lefty spot versus a righty spot. We hear the lane conversation happen a lot with Oliver Marmol. It's like John King's going to pitch in that game. Roycroft is going to pitch in that game. With where Maton has been, he's been pretty darn good this year, but we've seen him kind of fall behind the pecking order when it comes to guys like Kyle Leahy. Like, he is elevated certainly to be your number one setup man ahead of Ryan Helsley. Last night, Oliver Marmol commented that it's really like you have 2 closers, even though you did end up having an instance on Tuesday where Leahy gave one up. The confidence in him is still obviously going to be sky high. But in a game like this where you're down a couple of runs, you're going to use the rest of your bullpen, right? You're not going to go to Ryan Helsley down 3-1 because the percentage chance of you winning that game, even if he shoves, not particularly high. And there's just no reason to get the extra innings on Ryan Helsley's arm, especially in 2025 when he's not under contract long-term. You don't necessarily know at the trade deadline whether or not he's going to be somebody with a huge value if you can maintain that and keep him healthy and keep him intact between now and the end of July. I know it kind of sounds yucky to talk about maybe trading a guy like Ryan Helsley, given the Cardinals are in the mix on this thing. I have continued to tell Cardinals fans on this show and others, do not look at the standings, do not pay attention to the Cubs right now. It's not good for your mental health. They're not playing a real baseball team outside of the Pee Wee squads until June the 6th when they start a series against the Detroit Tigers. And starting, it's been about 8 or 10 days ago at this point, I said they're going to win 18 of the next 25 when they're playing the Marlins twice and the White Sox and the Pirates, and you get the picture. it's going to be a very profitable time for the Cubs. You just have to accept that. But that does not mean that the Cardinals are not going to continue to move forward toward being competitive. And when you are in that mindset, you're not necessarily going to be able to afford to chase every game down by 2 runs in May. So that's why it's John King and Roy Croft, and you may not have the utmost confidence in JoJo. Right now, to me, Steven Matz is their best lefty reliever, but he's also the one that can give you length, and that's what you saw from him on Tuesday, and so that's another reason that you don't end up seeing him Wednesday. The bullpen is like a puzzle, and at times I feel like folks maybe don't give enough credit to all of the balancing acts that a manager has to put together, and it's very easy to kind of play the hindsight game and say, well, that day they should have done this, that, or the other. They got to manage for a 6-month season, and that can sometimes be something we lose sight of, I think, throughout a year. But having broken that down and having talked about, Pallante, I think he's your number 4 kind of starter in your rotation, right? He's got a 4.18 ERA after this one. You'd like to see him get back down below 4.0, but you're just going to have to find a way to rein it in with the walks, and I think that ends up being a key to Pallante. It's not new news. We kind of have known that's been the situation for him because when you pitch to contact, you find yourself quickly getting into more trouble when you're giving away those free passes. And look, he didn't pitch terribly today, but this was a game where the Cardinals were going to have to win it lean without a lot of offensive productivity, and they was not quite able to be sharp enough because, look, if he gives up 1 or 2 runs, then maybe by the time you get to the 7th, 8th inning, you are maybe more considerate of using some of your A squad rather than, that's 3-1. We're still needing to see a little bit of sign of life from the offense before we start chasing this game, even with the off day coming up on Thursday. Offensively, it was just one of those days, but you really do appreciate the swings that Alec Burleson's given him right now, and I feel like some way, somehow, you got to find a way, if you're Oliver Marmol, to continue putting Burleson in there against just about every right-handed starter or median expectation type of game. You're going to have openers. You're going to have situations that change the handedness conversation. But, man, has Burleson been swinging the bat pretty well recently, and you feel like you'd like to keep that intact. We've talked so much about Runway. I know you'd like to give it to Gorman. You'd like to give it to Walker. Today was actually a rare occasion where those guys were in the same lineup because Lars Nootbaar had a day off, and it was nothing more than that. Standard, I think it's only his 2nd or maybe 3rd of the season, and so not something to be alarmed by at all. He's still on a pace to be durable and play 150-plus games, which is what you want to see from your leadoff man. But that moved Mason Wynn up to the top. He didn't have a great day with an 0 for. Donnie was 0 for. Herrera was 0 for despite having 1 walk. Arenado back to 0 for, sub 700 for the OPS there. Not a strong game from Walker offensively. Was 0 for 3, had a couple of strikeouts, and one in particular where a late inning situation arises. There's runners on 1st and 2nd. It's a passed ball that allows them to advance to 2nd and 3rd. And we talked about this on the Sports Hub STL postgame show, which you should go check out over on their channel between myself and Joe Roderick. But the tenor of that at bat should have changed for Walker in a way that allows him and kind of compels him to protect the plate when you just need to put the ball in play because you've got 2 ducks on the pond ready to drive him in a key spot that I believe would have tied the game. And he strikes out looking in that spot on a pitch that was borderline. I'm not saying it was a perfect, obvious strike, but I do believe in the notion of protect the plate. And I think that should have been, rather than kind of the way that you can approach the at-bat early and think about doing damage, I think Walker probably should have shifted that priority and gotten the bat off the shoulders there. You did have a spot where Joel Pozo then comes in to pinch hit for Victor Scott II. I believe that was immediately following the Walker strikeout, if I'm remembering this correctly. If not, I do apologize. But Pozo coming off the bench does not bother me. I saw some comments from folks going, well, how can you take Victor Scott out of the game? And I get it. You do sacrifice defense. Of course you do. Part of that's roster construction. I largely think the roster is actually constructed pretty well, especially compared to what the bench looked like in 2024. But my disagreement is not the same one. If I do have a gripe, it's not the same one that most people would have. My disagreement is that, honestly, a guy like Michael Ciani should probably be on this team. Because when you think about Jose Barrero, what's the role that Barrero was serving? Well, he can come in defensively and be a decent enough outfielder for you. Although when we saw him play the start he got in center field on the road trip, it was a little bit of an adventure. I believe that was in Philadelphia, if I'm remembering correctly. And you're kind of like, I don't really know if he's got the instincts right now or the trust in himself to be great out there in center field. He's an athletic guy for sure. But okay, so he's lesser than Ciani in that regard. Well, he is a backup shortstop. He can fill in for Mason Wynn. How often are we going to see that, though? I just don't think. it goes back to what I said at the beginning of the season. I don't consider the backup to Mason Wynn to be a role on this roster that needs to be prioritized because the dude's either going to play or he's on the injured list. And look, if he really does need a day off twice a year, have Donovan play shortstop that day. I'm totally fine with that. I think the Cardinals would be too. So I from that perspective, I think a couple of instances in this series where you could have said Siani would have been useful. One in particular was Tuesday night. Imagine for a moment with me, and we didn't talk about this a ton last night, but I do think in retrospect it is kind of relevant. Burleson pinch hitting for Walker on Tuesday is a move that I was cool with, and you look the fact that there were reverse splits with the pitcher. I believe his name was Will Vest, and he was really tough on lefties. But Burleson works a walk against him, which was also a characteristic of Vest in the way that he had allowed a decent number of walks despite not many hits to lefties. So I was cool with Burleson batting for Walker there, but I was kind of thinking through the defensive machinations of that as we were in the press box last night as it was going on, and wondering, okay, would they put Gorman in at second base and maybe move Donnie to left and move Newt to right? What would they do if this works? Like if the Cardinals take the lead and Helsley gets the ninth with a one-run lead, what's the defensive alignment? Well, it didn't work out that they ended up scoring a run there, so you're tied going into the ninth, and they left Burleson in right field, which is fine, but they internally, I don't think, view him as a super, prioritizable option outfield-wise. They're getting him in there where they can because his bat is playing well, and you want to continue to see that play out. But I feel like the ball in the gap by Riley Green maybe would have been cut off had somebody else gotten a better jump. Not to pick on Burleson, because I don't know that to be sure, but if Siani were coming off the bench and available, because I don't know, you don't necessarily do it with Barrero. You don't have to trust in him being that big of an upgrade in the outfield to burn Burleson if this is going to be a game that goes, extra innings. But man, with Siani, he goes into center, Victor goes into right. That ball might get cut off. I'm not saying it gets caught, but it might be a completely different outcome on Tuesday. And you might say, well, what about the backup to Mason Wynn? Like, if that's the reason you're prioritizing Barrero on the roster, I just don't know how much of a priority that's worth having. And then to that end, Pozo ends up pinch hitting today. I think it was a no-brainer spot to be pinch hitting because Pozo was 5 for 7 against lefties this year. Victor hitting 178 against lefties. He was 1 for 2 in the game and did score the Cardinals' lone run. But that's okay. Like, you have to have a willingness to use Joel Pozo off the bench in that situation, in my opinion, if he's going to be on the roster. Because not every day is he going to be asked to catch. And so you'd like to be a little bit more versatile and say, we can use him in spots that it makes sense to use him. If he's going to be filling the Baker role, the Luken Baker righty bat off the bench role, which I have argued is what he's doing, with a little added juice and benefit that he can also catch in a pinch if you need him to. Herrera starting the game behind the plate on Wednesday made it even easier, I think, to fit Pozo in there, because if you had to go to another catcher later on, you still had Pages available because there was no catcher clogging up DH today. And so that was maybe what made Ollie Marmol a little bit more comfortable going to Pozo in a pinch hit role. But I think he could be even more comfortable. Like, let him serve in that Luken Baker role. And if you have a catcher spot that gets a little dicey in an extra inning situation or whatever because of an injury, you cross that bridge when you get to it. And I also believe the bridge is easily Wilson Contreras is also on this roster. He doesn't ever need to catch. It's why I push back when people say you have 4 catchers. I view it as a feature, not a bug. I think it makes sense to be able to be more aggressive because of the way the bench is built out. But frankly, the one move I would make is if Barrero's not ever taking pinch hit at bats and he's just a defensive replacement anyway, he's never replacing Wynn defensively. There's no point in that. Just go ahead and let Siani be that guy because he's really a good outfielder. Even if he's not hitting that well, which we'll go down on the farm here in a minute and talk about maybe that he doing some things good in AAA offensively. But those are kind of my thoughts about everything that played out for the Cardinals. And look, the fact that Pozo didn't get the hit, miss me with this idea that Pozo is not, worthy of being in that sparingly used right-handed bat off the bench role because he failed one time at a pinch hit opportunity. Like if you're victory lapping your take on that whole situation, the 3 catchers, he comes in, he can't even get a hit. You have less of a clue about baseball than you think you do. Anyway, that's my little side tangent on the night. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the minor league system and then wrap up with just a general question. Are you panicking about the series loss? It's the Cardinals' first series loss in a month. April 23rd, I believe, was the series finale against the Braves that they lost down in Atlanta. They haven't lost a series since then. Prior to this Tigers series, they came in with the best record in baseball. I assume they're leaving with basically the same. How do you feel right now about what's going on with the Cardinals? Ponder that question and put your answer into the comments below as we go down on the farm. It's time to go down on the farm. Brought to you by Hastings Layers Premium Eggs.
You'll be happier than a jackass eating thistle.
Huh? So a concept of down on the farm is talking about what's going on with mostly we stick with the AA and the AAA teams lately to kind of make sure that we're keeping an eye on the prospects that are at the higher levels of the organization. And maybe as it goes along, we'll try to mix in more conversation about the Palm Beach Cardinals when we can. But an instance of that today is obvious because Tink pitched for the Palm Beach Cardinals today as the Cardinals' number 3 prospect, according to MLB Pipeline, had a hitless inning with a strikeout, and as well as a pickoff of a runner straying a little bit too far off of first base. So how's that for a nice little return to the mound for Tink, who just threw the 1 inning. Cardinals not trying to go too crazy with him getting back on the mound after what I believe was a side strain. Was described as a significant strain, but I don't know that we ever knew exactly. Kind of felt like it might have been oblique. But a significant oblique, I think, would keep you out a lot longer than this. So I'm still not 100% on what the injury was. But him getting back on the mound, rehabbing with Palm Beach, that is excellent to see. And it comes on the heels of, I don't even recall if I've mentioned too much of this on the podcast yet, but Quinn Mathews has also begun a rehab assignment. And this was a couple of days ago over the weekend, or Monday, it may have been. Because most of the minor league system doesn't play games on Mondays. It's like the standardized off day in the minors. But Quinn Mathews was getting his feet wet with the rookie level FCL Cardinals, the Florida Coast League. And he ends up with 2 innings pitched, a hit allowed, no walks allowed, and no runs with 4 strikeouts. So that's really good to see. He was sidelined since April the 13th, has been dealing with a shoulder injury, which is extremely scary, I'll be honest with you. Shoulder is always, to me, more terrifying to hear about with a pitcher than elbow even, because elbow, you know what the fix is. He's going to be out for 14 months with Tommy John, and then he's going to be back and not good as new, but he'll get back to good as new eventually. Like, that is just the way we view these Tommy Johns these days. They're so common. We know how to handle them. Shoulder, man, that gets tricky, but a lot of times shoulder can also be minor, and you just need a month off, and then you can be back out on the mound. Certainly the numbers there as we go down on the farm from a couple of days ago look good for Quinn Mathews, and hopefully that is something that will continue. I think that happened on Monday. I'm looking at the MLB Pipeline tweet labeled May the 19th, and it was in the afternoon. So if it was Sunday, I do apologize, but that's the tweet that I was seeing discussing it. And Monday, we don't usually go down on the farm because we know that there's no minor league games being played, so it wasn't really something on my radar, but wanted to double back and make sure we talked about that. Now let's talk about the Memphis Redbirds winning 7-3 over the Jacksonville Jumbo Shrimp. And how about leadoff man Michael Ciani? I've been advocating for him to get the call-up anyway, and now he's out here hitting bombs. His 3rd home run of the season for Memphis. He was 2 for 3 with a run scored, an RBI on that homer. Also reached base via walk. He's got a 709 OPS down there. Again, I would bring him up for Barrero. I would do it today. I don't necessarily... Again, Barrero... Sure, he might give you a better at-bat than Ciani. I don't know for sure that that's true, but I would concede the point just to say I don't really care. That's not the role that he is being used in anyway. He's largely coming in for defense. He replaced Pozo after Pozo batted for Victor Scott on Wednesday. That's sort of the vibe that is being used for Barrero. Ciani's a better defender in center field, and I don't need the backup at shortstop. You can miss me with it. It's just not as important. So that's a move I would make. I'll continue to beat that drum. People can probably continue to say you're dumb. I don't like to hear about Michael Ciani talk, but Ciani is a very, very good baseball player. Offensively, he just obviously has not been able to produce at the level at the big league level that you need to see to have him be a regular everyday player. But he's a valuable tool off your bench for a winning team. And when the Cardinals were losing a bunch of games in a row, absolutely mix up the bench and try to find ways to get more spark offensively. Now they're back to playing better. I think Ciani can actually help the team in a bit role, a part-time role. We would never start a game, but having him off the bench, pinch run, be there for defense, and know that you're not getting like a marginal upgrade defensively. You're getting a legitimate one in late innings. I think it has value. You can let me know in the comments if you disagree. Jose Fermin had a couple of hits, Prieto with a couple of hits, and Mike Antico had a couple of hits as well as the Memphis squad got a 7-3 win. Andre Granillo with a scoreless inning, a couple of strikeouts out of the pen. Rodri Munoz scoreless as well in his inning of work. As I record this, it's a little after 10 p.m. The Springfield Cardinals have not yet finished up, but when they do, it will be in winning fashion as they're currently leading the Tulsa Drillers 13-3. Lots of fun offense from this game tonight, including J.J. Weatherholt going 2 for 5 with a walk, so he's on base 3 times to increase the OPS to 830. Nathan Church, 1 for 5, but the one was a good one as he homers. It's another grand slam, I believe, for him, 4 RBIs. He's hitting 345 with 1,000 OPS in Double-A, so maybe we see him get a call up to Triple-A at some point. Leonardo Bernal continuing to rake as the catcher down there at Double-A, 2 for 4. Couple of RBIs reached via walk as well. His 5th home run of the season, and Church had his 5th as well. The OPS for Bernal up to 837, so he's looked really good. Couple of runs scored for Chase Davis. That Double-A squad is starting to put some lumber out there, which is really nice to see. Still a kind of a subpar outing from Max Rajic, former minor league pitcher of the year, goes 3 1/3 and gives up 3 runs. But hey, 13-3, you'll take that, as it appears the Springfield Cardinals will get a win there. As we wrap, we'll continue to get those comments in, though, as it pertains to whether you're panicking, whether you're worried about things. I think a lot of people were pretty excited about the run the Cardinals were on when they won, 9 games in a row, and you had the 7-2 road trip, and then you come home, you're facing a Tigers team that is really, really good in the way they've been playing this year. You get the first win, you feel like you're riding high. Game 2 against Tarek Skubal happens. You come so close to winning it, but you don't. And I think that may have lagged into their performance a bit on Wednesday afternoon. It can be hard to shake those games sometimes, and they had to play like 14 hours later and maybe didn't quite get it shook off in the way that today's game played out. Maybe that's an unfair characterization, but it all lends itself to mean I wouldn't panic right now about where the Cardinals are at, but don't look at the standings. It's only going to get better for the Cubs for the next couple of weeks, and the Cardinals just really need to tread water, I think, is all they need to do for the time being. And if you can get to June the 6th within 4 or 5 games of the Cubs, I honestly think that'll be good enough because they're going to keep winning a bunch of these games. And so if you're still within 4 or 5 of the Cubs, it's 3 right now, that implies to me that the Cardinals would still be playing baseball at a pretty high level. So let me know in the comments if you disagree, if the series loss for the first time in basically a month has you feeling down in the dumps about the Cardinals. That's fine too. Let me know why. But largely, I would say let's see what it looks like this weekend against Arizona. I think it's going to be an important series for the Cardinals to get right back on the horse and maybe be able to take 2 of 3. If you've got questions for a Thursday podcast, because the Cardinals will have the off day, let me know in the comments below. What would you like for me to talk about or tackle in an episode of B-Schaeff Daily on Thursday? And before you get out of here, make sure to hit that subscribe button on YouTube so you don't miss any of our future content. That, though, is going to do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace!